There's been so much controversy surrounding whether or not the tolling of I-80 was a good idea, or in fact, should we create a concession and privatize the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And with all of that, there's bonds that have to be floated, capital raised, and then that capital comes back to the Commonwealth for us to take care of our road and bridge problem. The issues that we wanted to get to the bottom of was how expensive it is, number one, to monetize or use the assets of the Turnpike and monetize those assets, and or privatize the Turnpike. And the privatization of the Turnpike, you have to understand, under Act 44, we monetized the Pennsylvania Turnpike for 50 years. Under the lease agreement that's being bantered about, it's 100 years. So we would be transferring ownership of a Commonwealth asset to 2108. Wow. Very concerning. And what was more concerning is the cost. What will it cost? And what the study told us is that when you monetize those two assets under Act 44, we can realize about $26 billion in revenues, and it gets very convoluted, Charlie. That's the problem. That's why we wanted Wall Street experts to come in and tell us what to do, as opposed to a complete monetization of the Turnpike. But let's just talk about the costs in very simple terms. 55-year lease of the Turnpike will cost the tolling public, the people who are going to pay those tolls, in about $26 billion over 50 years. If you do a 100-year lease of the Turnpike, it's about $90 billion, and that's with a B. That's $90,000 million. And what we learned was that there would have to be certainly a very, very aggressive tolling scheme. Talk about maintenance, talk about what do you do with the employees that work there. And if you maintain those employees and maintain a certain maintenance schedule, that cost even grows larger. And I think the bottom line is that what we learned is that it would be so expensive to go with a Turnpike lease to a private entity that it really reinforced the idea that Act 44 or the tolling of I-80 was the right way to go.
So when you say aggressive tolling scheme, that means major toll increases.
Absolutely. Somebody has to pay for that.
Driver,
somebody
right?
has to pay for that $90 billion.
Well, tell me, what makes your study different than all the other competing studies? There are very strong opinions on both sides of this issue. Everyone's coming out with what they can to support it. What makes you confident in what you found out in your study?
Well, just the people who did the study. I mean, one of the gentlemen was a vice president of Shearson Lehman. The other was a Harvard fellow who also came from the financial markets out of New York City. As a matter of fact, all three of them, all three gentlemen that did the study, all came out of the financial markets. Two of them now work in academia at Penn State and Harvard. But the three of those gentlemen all came out of Wall Street financial houses. So they had the pedigree and they had the background to in fact do the studies and tell us, because it gets, when you start talking about taking money, monetizing it, indexing it, and then discount rates, most people don't understand what that means. They brought it down to simple terms and said, this is what the cost of the money is. And very simply, under a public partnership like Act 44, we can bond that money at about a 4% interest rate because being in the public sector, those public bonds, they cost about 4.5%. We found that in the monetization of the Turnpike under that public-private partnership, that the cost of the money alone is around 9%. And if you look, and don't forget that in all of that, there's also profit motive. They're not doing this out of the graciousness of their heart to come in here and take over the Turnpike. There is a profit motive as well.
They have to be able to make money.
They have to be able to make money, or they wouldn't be interested.
And the only way they can make money on this deal is if the tolls go up,
right,
and if maintenance goes down. That's the best way to maximize profit, and that's what they're in this for. Isn't that true, Representative?
It's absolutely nail on the head, because certainly we could raise $1.5 million under Act 44 if we wanted to, but we have to raise tolls proportionately to raise that $1.5 billion. So, like everybody's saying, well, we could raise X number of dollars more with the Turnpike deal. Well, we could raise X number of dollars more with the Act 80 deal, but it costs too much money. That's the problem. When we got into this whole debate, the first thing we talked about was we need money to fix our roads and bridges, and that's what I think everybody's losing sight of. We have a significant infrastructure problem in this Commonwealth.
And is it fair, Maura, don't want to interrupt you very much
Sure.
here. Don't lose that train of thought.
No.
But train, that's another thing we'll talk about here soon.
We could.
Part of our
But
infrastructure.
is it fair to put the whole burden of maintaining the state's transportation infrastructure on one road and its users?
Right.
To put it just on the Turnpike or the Turnpike and I-80?
That's precisely what would happen. It would be Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and those people in between paying for our entire infrastructure system, which is really unfair.
Now go back to your other...
Well, the reality is that as leaders, this problem has been around for 3 or 4 years, and we've been debating what funding mechanism do we come up with to fix this problem. And when you start looking at the alternatives, do you raise the gas tax 20 cents, gasoline at $3 a gallon? There was no political will at all, and I mean none whatsoever, to raise the gas tax. Let 20 cents, a nickel. Yeah. We couldn't get the votes for a nickel, let alone 20 cents. And that's what this monetization of I-80 does. It equates to about 20 cents in gas taxes. Then we said, well, okay, we can't do a gas tax. How about we double your registration fees? Well, nobody wanted to double registration fees, and that's not only on automobiles, that would have been on commercial trucks and everyone else. They pay $2,000 to register a truck. It would be $4,000 or $5,000. Same thing with your car, $36, double that to $72. Your licensing fees, all of those fees would have doubled, and we still would have needed money in the gas tax. So again, no political will to do that. Then we said, why don't we look at leasing I-80 or the Turnpike, tolling the Turnpike, or monetizing the Turnpike. And it was determined that it was just too expensive. So the fallback position was, let's go to Act 44 and toll I-80 and try to derive the revenues there. But because we looked at the alternatives, we looked at where we can get 102 votes to come up with the necessary money to pay for the infrastructure problems. And you know, I think the public knows we have 122,000 miles of road to maintain, 44,000 of which are state roads, 77,000 local roads, 25,000 bridges, 6,000 structurally deficient that have to be fixed. Yeah. So you know, it's something that you just can't turn your back on. It's a significant infrastructure problem, and you know, to be quite candid, it's not just roads and bridges, it's water lines, sewer lines, it's everything. But we're just focusing on the transportation infrastructure. And the bottom line is, when we looked at those long-term costs, it would have been so much more expensive. And then to give a Commonwealth or a public asset away to somebody for 100 years, I thought was really counterproductive. Look at most of the corporations today. Name all the corporations that last 100 years. Not many do.
Mm-hmm. One of the big issues for the proponents of privatization is that the experience or the service will be better on the Turnpike. As someone whose entire family is located in Pittsburgh, I spent a lot of time,
right.
a lot of time on the Turnpike, and it's if it's not snowing in Somerset, it's raining. So
right.
you know, you're always counting on it, the conditions to be taken care of.
She's a meteorologist.
I am in my spare time. I play one on TV. What does your study address? Any the service-related issues? What the experience would be like, more not just the monetization.
It really doesn't get into detail on service, but you know, that's one of the things that I think the legislature would weigh in on. I think a lot of us and anyone who traverses the Turnpike will tell you, when the roads are bad, it's a great road to be on, because they maintain those roads, they maintain the bridges, they maintain the infrastructure. When it's bad weather, the roads are salted and the roads are clear. And again, that would be one of the guarantees I know that I, as a legislator, would be saying to any concessionaire that comes in, we want to make sure that that maintenance schedule is maintained. Well, that's all well and good, but there's a cost to that. Right. The concessionaire is going to say, well, sure, we could make sure there's tons of salt on the road, but there's a cost to doing business, and you know, that will again affect the amount of money that they buy that road for, as well as the employees. You know, if a concessionaire comes in, he's not going to want to maintain the employees at the rate that we pay them, with the benefits that we pay them, that in time, through attrition, they would try to change that workforce. Yet there may be members of the General Assembly who says that you have to maintain that workforce. Well, to maintain that workforce, it will cost a certain amount of money. But it was really determined that you're talking an upfront for a 100-year lease, an upfront payment or increase in tolls of anywhere from 35 to 50%, and then a 5% toll increase every year thereafter, you know, going out. So it could be very, very expensive.